I inherited everything from my ex-husband's mother after caring for her. Now he and his mistress are threatening to sue me. Hi everyone, I'm in a complicated situation and would love to hear your thoughts. My name is Gigi, I'm 27, and I have a daughter, Naomi, who's 7. I was married to my ex-husband Jack, who's 30, for almost 8 years. 2 months into my pregnancy with our second child, I discovered Jack was cheating on me with his colleague, Susan, who's 28. I found out when I accidentally saw their messages on his phone. In tears, I demanded an explanation, and Jack finally admitted that Susan was also pregnant with his child. I was so shocked I nearly fainted. Jack and I fought a lot, and despite everything, my mother-in-law came to support me. I was under such stress that I ended up having a miscarriage. When Jack learned we lost the baby, he didn't stay to grieve with me or offer comfort. He left for Susan and blamed me for the loss. I was devastated, crying for days. Thankfully, my former mother-in-law stayed with me, helping with Naomi so I could process the loss. The divorce with Jack was brutal. He refused to pay child support but was forced to by court order. Throughout the process, Jack made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me or Naomi. He fully relinquished custody to me, and I felt so sorry for my daughter, but there was nothing I could do. He paid child support on time but never once tried to visit Naomi or even ask about her. Later, I learned Susan had given birth to his son, and they've been together since. In this nightmare, my main support came from my parents and my former mother-in-law. Here's the backstory. My parents and Jack's mother were lifelong best friends. That's how I met Jack. Our families brought us together, and we started dating. When my mother-in-law learned of Jack's affair, she was furious and immediately supported me. She and Jack fought constantly over his relationship, and she eventually vowed never to speak to him again after he left our family. She also made it clear she wanted nothing to do with his new woman or their child. As strange as it sounds, she kept her word until her death. She never reconciled with Jack, even when he begged to meet her and his son. Susan was very jealous that my mother-in-law considered me and Naomi family but not her. When my mother-in-law came to help me, her relatives heavily criticized her. Jack's father had passed away years ago, and the family tried to convince her to forgive her son, saying he's her child, so she should let it go and rebuild ties, especially with her grandson. But she stood firm. When Susan gave birth, Jack's relatives sided with him, knowing he'd cheated on me, and didn't even check on me or Naomi. It got so bad that they stopped inviting my mother-in-law to family events just to include Jack and Susan, since she refused to attend if they were there. I felt bad for her being distanced from her family, but she reassured me, saying I was like a daughter to her, and she didn't care that her relatives cut her off. I'm so grateful for her. Such support and love from a mother-in-law is rare. Over time, her health declined. She couldn't walk or care for herself. I offered her to move in with us permanently so I could look after her full-time. We hired a morning caregiver, and I took care of her in the evenings. I spent a lot of time with her, and it never felt like a burden. Naomi adored her grandma and was thrilled we lived together. Then my mother-in-law revealed that after learning Jack abandoned me, she changed her will. Originally, as her only son, Jack was set to inherit everything. But after the affair came to light, she rewrote it. Now, the house and her insurance payout went to Naomi, while I was named the inheritor of a substantial sum of money and a family heirloom. She explained it was a sign of respect and trust, asking me to preserve the heirloom and pass it to Naomi one day, so a piece of her would live on in our family. I was deeply touched. Jack was to receive her car and his father's art collection. Naomi's money would be held in trust by me until she turned 18, and if anything happened to me, my parents would manage it. I was stunned and didn't know what to say. I was honored she valued us and wanted to secure Naomi's future. I repeatedly urged her to reconsider and include Susan and their child in the will, saying I wouldn't hold a grudge since Susan is now his wife. But she was adamant, repeating that in her eyes, I'm Jack's only wife, even if we're divorced, and everything should go to Naomi as the rightful heir. I understood her stance and accepted her decision. During this time, Jack never called or asked about his mother's health, though I wouldn't have minded if he wanted to visit. He didn't seem to care. One day, my mother-in-law had breathing issues, and I rushed her to the hospital. I was terrified for her life. While my dad watched Naomi, my mom and I spent the night at the hospital, praying she'd pull through. Thankfully, they released her. After that, I didn't want her to pass without reconciling with her son, so I called Jack, setting aside my hurt, and begged him to visit. I told him the doctor's prognosis wasn't hopeful, and I feared she might go any moment. Instead of empathy, Jack argued, complaining that his mother never accepted Susan. I pleaded with him to put pride aside for his mother's sake. He claimed his schedule was too tight to make time. It was hard to hear, given her condition, but I insisted he find even a little time. Reluctantly, he agreed to a short visit. When Jack arrived, I was shocked. He brought Susan. I stayed silent, though I wasn't happy to see her in my home, but for my mother-in-law's sake, I said nothing. When he saw his mother, the tension between them was palpable. Their conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses, and he didn't try to genuinely connect. It felt like he came out of obligation, not to mend things. It saddened me, but at least he honored my request. When my mother-in-law saw Jack brought Susan and their child, she resisted, but I calmed her, saying I didn't mind as long as they supported her. She was very weak, bedridden, barely able to move, so she had to accept it. I kept my word and stayed quiet, even when Susan started acting overly sweet to her. When my mother-in-law reiterated she didn't want to see Susan's son, Susan reminded her he's her grandson too. I left the room to give them privacy and check on Naomi, who was upset seeing her father. Jack didn't even acknowledge her. From the kitchen, I noticed Susan step into the yard to make a call. Through the open window, I heard her laughing, complaining about being forced to visit Jack's mother. She said Jack assured her his mother would leave him everything, and they were only there for appearances one last time. Susan gleefully shared plans to move into the house, redecorate it to their taste, saying the interior was outdated, and she'd remove all photos of me and Naomi once they inherited it. I froze hearing her cruel words. She went on about replacing furniture, repainting walls, and remodeling, all while mocking my mother-in-law's health and final days. I decided not to tell my mother-in-law to avoid upsetting her, especially since Jack was convinced she hadn't changed the will and everything would go to him and his new child. I didn't feel the need to correct him. If he couldn't bother about Naomi, let him reap the consequences of his indifference. He and Susan never learned the truth about the will. I felt bitter knowing my mother-in-law might not have long, and she deliberately chose to leave everything to me and Naomi to punish her son and his mistress for their actions. Her own father's infidelity had broken her as a child, and she couldn't bear watching her son destroy his daughter's life the same way. She wanted Naomi to feel loved even after she was gone. Soon, my mother-in-law's condition worsened, and she passed away last week. I handled the funeral arrangements since neither her relatives nor Jack and his wife offered help. I wanted to give her a proper send-off. My parents helped choose a beautiful casket and a venue for the ceremony. Susan didn't even attend the funeral, though some relatives did, but it was clear they didn't care much. When her lawyer later read the will, I couldn't hold back tears. Everything was as she'd said. She left the house, money, and heirloom to me and Naomi. I felt grief for losing her and gratitude for securing my daughter's future. While I dealt with paperwork and emotions, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Susan, Jack, their son Darren, and several relatives, all looking grim and angry. Jack asked to come in and I let them. The atmosphere was tense. Jack immediately demanded to know why I got everything. His mother's house, money, heirloom, all going to me. He shouted, furious. I tried staying calm, explaining she'd thought it through and made her decision. Jack accused me of brainwashing her while she was sick, but I pointed out the dates on the will. It was finalized long before her condition became critical. Susan chimed in, irritated, asking why I and my daughter got everything, not her and her son, since they're family too. I couldn't hold back and told them I'd overheard Susan on the phone in the yard during their last visit, planning to throw out our photos and redecorate the house. Susan's eyes widened. She denied it, calling me a liar trying to divide the family. I reminded her she and Jack destroyed the family when they started their affair. The relatives who came with them also complained, saying as blood kin, they deserved a share. They demanded I sell the house and split the money 8 ways. I was shocked at their audacity and coldness. I said I was the only one who cared for her until the end. None of them called or visited, so they have no right to demand anything. They argued loudly about how unfair it was. Jack insisted it's his childhood home, and he wants to live there with Susan and their son, threatening to sue and contest the will if I don't give it up. I laughed in his face, reminding him he didn't care for his mother, only showing up once when I begged. I told him he can try suing, but her lawyer assured me the will is airtight. He'd get nowhere. Jack was stunned by my calmness. Susan suddenly begged me to think of Darren's well-being, saying he deserves a good life like Naomi. I agreed a child deserves a good life but pointed out Jack never cared about Naomi's well-being. Why should I give them anything when my mother-in-law wanted it for us? I asked them to leave, saying if they have questions, they can talk to the lawyer. It was clear they couldn't do anything legally, or they wouldn't have come with demands. I closed the door, feeling satisfied for standing up for myself and honoring her wishes. Since then, Jack keeps calling and texting, spewing hatred, saying if I had any decency, I'd return what rightfully belongs to his family, not me and Naomi, accusing me of greed and demanding I give it up. I remain unshaken, glad I protected what she left us. Update 1. I thought this story would interest only a few people, but it's gotten a huge response. Thanks to everyone who listened and gave advice. To those upset I didn't ask my mother-in-law to include Jack and Susan's child in the will, I'll say again, I tried, but it was her decision. I can't change it now. Call me selfish, but I'm not sharing the inheritance. I'll prioritize myself and my daughter. Of course, I'm angry at Jack and Susan. They broke my heart, and their affair contributed to my miscarriage. When I was devastated, Jack abandoned me for Susan instead of supporting me. My mother-in-law chose not to include their child or Susan in the will. She had plenty of time to revise it if she wanted, she didn't. Yes, I feel for their child, but it's not my responsibility. Besides, she left Jack his father's art collection. He can make thousands selling it, so they'll manage. Those judging me likely wouldn't act more nobly in my shoes. I'm firm on not yielding to Jack. Reminder, Naomi is also Jack's daughter, but he only cares about his son with Susan. Why should he expect anything from us after all the pain he caused? Update 2. The situation with Jack and Susan remains tense. They keep demanding their share and throwing accusations, poisoning my life. Yesterday, Susan called out of the blue. I didn't even know it was her number. She started yelling, accusing me of greed and taking what's theirs. She said she's glad Jack left me after the miscarriage because I didn't deserve to be his wife. I was at work and initially confused. I calmly explained it was my mother-in-law's will, not my doing, but Susan wouldn't stop, calling me a liar who stole what's theirs. I reminded her she never had a good relationship with my mother-in-law, so why claim her estate now? Then Susan crossed a line, threatening me and my child, saying if I don't give Jack part of the inheritance, she'll find a way to get to my daughter and tell her the truth about me. That was unacceptable. I cut her off, saying if she comes near my child, I'll go to the police. I reminded her I have her threatening messages and can easily get a restraining order, warning I could also report her to her employer for what she's doing on work time. That seemed to sober her. She hung up. I immediately called Jack, telling him what Susan said. He apologized, claiming he didn't know she threatened my daughter, but I cut him off, saying I owe him nothing and will keep what his mother left me. The will is legal. He can't do anything. I warned that if they contact me or my child again, I'll file a police report. My phone's been silent since. If Susan or Jack dare threaten me again, I'm ready to follow through. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update. I keep getting requests to share how I'm doing. My daughter and I have moved into my mother-in-law's house. I constantly think how I wish she were still alive. I miss her. Everywhere. In every room where we laughed, the yard where she loved spending evenings, the kitchen where we had endless talks, her presence lingers in every corner, filling the house with her warmth. Each day, I feel mixed emotions. Gratitude that Naomi's future is secure, and sorrow that the person who meant so much to us is gone. I find comfort in knowing the place where she lived and was happy will be a true home for Naomi. In those moments, I feel her spirit nearby. I want to cherish everything she left us with respect and love for her memory.